My name is Rachel, and a few years ago I took a job as a rural nurse for a county clinic in Missouri. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well, and after years of chaos in the city, I craved quiet. The clinic gave me a small rental cabin a few miles from town. It sat alone on a gravel road, surrounded by overgrown fields and dense tree lines, with the nearest neighbor half a mile away. It looked peaceful, like something out of a postcard. But I learned pretty quickly that in the countryside, silence doesn't mean safety. Sometimes it just means you'll never hear the scream. The first week was uneventful. I spent my mornings driving into town and my evenings reading or watching old movies. Nights were different, though. I'd grown up hearing city noise, sirens, cars, people shouting. Out here, the silence was so deep, it almost felt alive. I noticed the cabin creaked more than expected. It wasn't just wood settling, it felt like footsteps. I'd hear them late, usually around 2 or 3 a.m., soft and slow across the ceiling. But the cabin didn't have an upstairs. I told myself it was an animal, or maybe branches scraping the roof, but it kept happening in the same pattern. A few steps, pause, a few more, like someone trying not to wake me. On the 8th night, I was brushing my teeth when I heard a knock. 3 knocks, soft but deliberate. I froze. It didn't come from the door, it came from inside the wall behind the bathroom mirror. At first, I thought maybe it was the plumbing or some animal, but it happened again the next night. Same spot, same 3 knocks. I tapped back just to see if it was an echo. Nothing happened. I went to bed uneasy, the kind of uneasy where your body is tired, but your brain keeps listening, waiting for something to happen. Around 2:45 a.m., I woke up to hear footsteps overhead again. But this time, they didn't stop. They circled. I called the clinic the next morning and asked if anyone else had stayed in the cabin before. My supervisor hesitated before saying the last nurse only stayed a month before transferring. She didn't give a reason. I asked if anyone had keys to the place. She said just the clinic and me. That evening, I examined the attic crawl space. It was empty, thick with cobwebs, and the floorboards looked untouched. But I noticed something odd. In the back corner near the insulation, there was a small hole in the wall. It looked like it had been carved out with a tool, just wide enough for someone to see through. That night, the knocks started again. But this time they moved. I heard them from the bathroom, then 10 minutes later from the wall behind my bed. I pressed my ear to the wall and listened. Behind the plaster, something scraped, like fingernails dragging lightly across wood. I backed away, heart pounding. I packed a bag and left the cabin that night, slept in my car outside the clinic. I told myself I was being paranoid. Rural life was just messing with me. I went back the next afternoon to grab more of my things. When I opened the front door, everything looked the same. But on the mirror, in the bathroom, written in the condensation from the shower I never used, were 3 words. You came back. I didn't shower, didn't eat. I just stared at that mirror, holding my breath, waiting to hear something. It stayed quiet. Too quiet. I called the sheriff's office and a deputy agreed to come out. He was older, probably in his 60s, and didn't seem surprised by what I told him. He looked around the cabin, checked the attic, and then asked if I had ever heard of the Ganner family. I hadn't. He explained that before the cabin was owned by the clinic, it was part of a small farming property. The Ganners had lived there in the early 90s. One of the sons, Timothy, had some issues, he said. He went missing when he was 16. Disappeared without a trace. His parents moved out shortly after. Some folks believe he ran away, others believe something worse happened, but nobody ever found him. The deputy ended by saying I might want to find somewhere else to stay. I tried. I really did, but the nearest rentals were 40 minutes out, and my budget was tight. I started sleeping at the clinic, on the old cot in the break room. But one night, after a long shift, I decided to go back to the cabin just to grab a few personal things. I figured I'd be in and out in under 10 minutes. I arrived around 11 p.m., unlocked the door, and the second I stepped inside, I heard something shift above me. Not just a creak, but movement. A low drag, like something heavy being pulled. I should have left, but I was angry, tired of feeling afraid of my own home. I grabbed a flashlight, climbed into the attic again, and aimed the beam toward the far end. There was no one. But the hole I'd seen earlier was now bigger, wide enough for someone to crawl through. And near the edge of it, I saw something half buried in insulation. A photograph. It was faded and dirty, but it showed a teenage boy standing in front of the cabin. Someone had scratched an X through his eyes. On the back, in shaky handwriting, was a name. Timothy. I took it and climbed down, locking the attic behind me. I called the sheriff again, but this time he didn't come. He just said, "We've looked before. We never found anything. If I were you, I'd take that photo as a sign." That was the last time I stayed in that place overnight. But it wasn't the last time I heard from it. The knocks didn't stop. They followed me. A week after I moved into a motel, I started hearing them again, not as loud, but unmistakable. 3 soft knocks, always around 3 a.m. I changed rooms twice. On the third night, I left the TV on, volume low. At exactly 3:02 a.m., the signal cut out. The screen went static for 5 seconds. Then, faintly through the fuzz, I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. I left the motel that same night, drove back to my sister's place in St. Louis, and stayed with her for 3 months. Things were quiet there. No knocks, no footsteps, no photos or messages. Eventually, I left the clinic job entirely. I told them I couldn't handle the isolation. They didn't ask questions. But months later, one of the newer nurses found me on Facebook and sent me a message. She had taken over the same cabin, said it was a little creepy, but fine. Then, in her last message, she said she started hearing soft knocks behind the walls, always in 3s. I didn't reply. I blocked her after that. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to. To this day, I don't know what was in that cabin or if something really followed me. Maybe Timothy never left. Maybe his family buried more than a secret. Maybe something got trapped in that place, something that wants to be remembered. All I know is that when I hear knocks now, even from neighbors or delivery drivers, my skin goes cold. And every once in a while, in the middle of the night, I wake up, not because of a sound, but because of the silence, the kind that feels like it's waiting. I grew up in a remote farming village in the Philippines, far from the noise of the city. Our home sat at the end of a long dirt road, surrounded by rice paddies and sugarcane fields that stretched for miles. I was 13 the summer this happened, the kind of summer where the air sticks to your skin and time seems to slow down. My parents were strict, but also trusting in that old-school, small-town kind of way. As long as I helped with chores and came home before dark, I had the freedom to explore. And I did, constantly. The only other kid my age nearby was my cousin Adrian, who spent the school holidays with us. He had a slingshot, an annoying laugh, and way too much confidence. But he was my best friend. Behind our house was a massive open field owned by a farmer named Mang Erning.
He was in his 60s, mostly kept to himself, and always looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. There were rumors about him, like most small villages have, that his wife left in the middle of the night and was never found, that he sometimes talked to things that weren't there. But mostly, people just called him odd and left him alone. What stood out the most about his land, though, was the Scarecrow. It was enormous, maybe 7 feet tall, and didn't look like something you'd buy or make for fun. It wore a moldy coat, had arms made of thick wood wrapped in cloth, and its head wasn't a sack like most scarecrows, but an old, discolored mannequin head with painted-on eyes that were just slightly off. It never scared the birds, and honestly, it scared me more than anything. Adrian and I were curious about the Scarecrow, so we started paying more attention to it. One morning, while we were walking to the river, I noticed something strange. The Scarecrow was standing near the far edge of the field, by the coconut trees. That afternoon, when we passed by again, it was closer, about 20 feet from where we first saw it. I told myself I probably misremembered, but then it happened again and again. Every day it was somewhere slightly different, like it had taken a step when no one was watching. Adrian was the first to joke about it. Maybe Mang Ernin gets bored and moves it around to freak people out. But the more we watched, the more it felt wrong. It wasn't just the location. The angle of the head seemed to change too, always facing us. Always. On the 4th day, we got bold and decided to test it. We placed a stick in the ground right next to the Scarecrow's foot before heading to town with my uncle. When we returned that evening, just before sunset, the Scarecrow had shifted a full meter away from the stick, and its head was tilted further than before, like its neck had been twisted. We stared at it in silence for a long time, and neither of us said anything until we were back inside the house. That night, I couldn't sleep. The crickets outside were unusually quiet, and the heat was thick even with all the windows open. Around 2 a.m., I thought I heard a rustling sound outside. I sat up and looked through the bamboo slats of my window. In the moonlight, I could barely make out the edge of the field. I saw it. The Scarecrow was standing by the fence at the very back of our backyard. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was a dream. I didn't tell anyone, but when Adrian and I checked the field, it was back in the middle where it usually stood, except now its coat was torn at the sleeve and something dark stained the fabric. That evening, we snuck into the field with a flashlight, determined to get a closer look. The air in the field felt heavier, like it was thicker to breathe. The bugs weren't chirping, and the silence felt loud. As we got closer, I noticed something under the Scarecrow's feet. The ground had been disturbed, scratches like someone had dragged their heels while trying to resist being pulled. I shined the flashlight up its body and paused at its chest. There was a faint smell like rot and damp soil. Its arms were jointed with what looked like old rope, but also something organic. Adrian reached out and poked the coat, then immediately pulled back. It's warm. It's warm like a person. We ran. I wish I could say we didn't go back, but the next day, it was gone. Just gone. The field was empty. Mang Erning's house was locked up. No one had seen him since the day before. That night, my uncle got a call. They found Mang Erning's body in a ditch near the mountain road. The official word was heart attack, but I overheard the adults talking. His hands were torn up and his eyes had bled. They buried him quickly. No wake, no vigil, just a quiet funeral the next morning. That should have been the end of it. 2 nights later, I woke up again to the same silence. I crept to the window and looked out. The Scarecrow was back, but not in the field. It was standing on the edge of the backyard, closer than before. I could see the outline of its head, tilted at that too far angle. My heart was pounding. I shook Adrian awake, and he saw it too. We stayed up the rest of the night, too scared to move. When the sun finally rose, it was gone again. My parents didn't believe us. They said we were making things up, telling ghost stories. We tried to stay away from the field after that. For a while, everything was quiet. But one evening we were coming back from the sari-sari store when we saw a new scarecrow in a different field, closer to the village road. It looked different, but had the same kind of vibe. Oversized, wrong proportions, the same painted mannequin head. We never saw who put it there. We asked the landowner and he said he didn't put up a scarecrow. Thought maybe someone else had, but didn't know who. Over the next week, it moved, slowly. Same pattern, a step closer to the road each day. I don't know how to explain it, but we think it's looking for something, or someone, or maybe it's just following whoever saw it last. We never figured out what it wanted, but people still talk about the scarecrow that doesn't stay still. A few farmers claim they've seen it move. Others say it's just superstition. But every few years, another one pops up in a different part of the region, always with that off-looking head, always shifting when you're not looking. I haven't gone back to that village in years, but sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night for no reason, I check the window, just to make sure it's not standing there.
When I was 16, my family spent a summer out in the countryside of northern Missouri. My dad had inherited a small property from his uncle, a rundown two-story farmhouse surrounded by fields and bordered by dense forest. It had been abandoned for years, but Dad saw it as an opportunity to get away from the noise for a while. I didn't love the idea, but I wasn't given much of a choice. So for 2 months, my parents, my younger sister Rachel, and I moved into the house to clean it up and maybe even fix it enough to sell. The house sat on a sloping patch of land surrounded by unkempt grass that reached up to your knees. In the distance, beyond a rotting wooden fence, stretched a field of corn so tall and wild that you couldn't see through it. Behind the field was a tree line, thick and black with pine and oak. I remember thinking it looked like the kind of place people disappeared in. My first night there, I noticed something off. I woke up around midnight to use the bathroom, and as I passed the upstairs window in the hallway, I glanced out toward the cornfield. There was someone standing at the edge of it. Not walking, not moving, just standing. I froze. The figure was too far to make out details, but it was tall and hunched slightly forward. I kept staring, unsure if it was a scarecrow, but it hadn't been there earlier that day. And then I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't tell anyone. The house was already giving me the creeps, and I didn't want my parents to write it off as just your imagination. The next few days passed normally. We cleaned, painted, pulled weeds. Rachel and I helped patch holes in the fence, and we started clearing a path along the woods for what Dad hoped would be a garden one day. But I couldn't stop looking at the field. Every time I passed a window or walked near the back of the house, I'd stare out, waiting for the shape to return. It didn't. Not until the following Friday. That night, I was lying in bed with the window cracked open. It was muggy, and the fan in the room barely helped. Just as I was starting to drift off, I heard something crunch. A step, like someone walking through dry grass. Then another. I sat up and listened harder. There were footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the field. I tiptoed to the window and looked out. The moon was behind the clouds, but I could see the edge of the corn clearly. And there it was again, that same figure, just standing there, barely visible in the shadows. I couldn't see its face or even clothes, just the outline of a person. I whispered, "Hello?" But nothing moved. Then the clouds shifted, moonlight brightened the field, and I saw something that froze my blood. It wasn't facing the house. It was turned sideways, but its head was twisted completely toward me. The next morning, I tried to talk to my dad. I asked if he'd ever seen anyone out near the property, maybe a neighbor, maybe a hiker. He looked at me kind of funny and said, "The closest neighbor is 5 miles down the road. No one comes out this far unless they're lost." That didn't help. I asked about Uncle Raymond, the one who used to own the house, but Dad got quiet. He just said, "He didn't really keep in touch near the end. Had some problems, mental stuff." I left it alone. But that night, it came closer. Around 2 a.m., I heard something scraping outside, like nails against the wood. I peeked through the window and didn't see anything at first. But then something caught my eye down below. Scratches, long, deep scratches trailing up the wall beneath my window, and the grass directly under it was flattened, as if someone had stood there for a while, watching. The next day, Rachel told me something that made my stomach turn. She said that she'd woken up in the night and seen someone looking through her window. Not a face, just the shape of a head with long fingers pressed to the glass. She thought it was me at first, messing with her, but when she sat up, it dropped out of view. I told her it wasn't me. We both went pale. Mom and Dad dismissed us when we told them. Probably an animal, or your imagination running wild. I didn't argue anymore, but that night, I pushed a dresser in front of my window and stayed up with a flashlight clutched in my hand. That was the night it knocked. Not on the door, on the walls. First, a tap, then another, louder. It started near the back door, then circled the house. We followed the sound from inside, Mom clutching a kitchen knife, Dad yelling out into the darkness. But no one responded. Just the tapping, like fingers rapping gently on the wooden walls. Then, silence. We didn't sleep at all that night. In the morning, we found deep prints in the mud outside. Not footprints exactly, more like elongated indents, as if someone had walked on their hands or knees or something worse. On the last night, everything spiraled. Rachel woke up screaming. When we rushed to her room, she was standing on the bed pointing at the window. "It tried to open it," she kept saying. Her window screen was bent and the latch had been jiggled loose. My dad finally believed something was wrong. He grabbed his rifle and went outside with a flashlight. We watched from the window. He made it about 30 feet toward the corn before the beam of light flickered. Then he stopped. The light went out. And then we heard him yell. He ran back inside, face pale, breathing hard. He kept repeating, "There's something out there! There's something out there!" We packed up that same night and drove straight to a motel in town. None of us said much. The next morning, my dad filed a report with the local sheriff. They promised to check the property, but we never got any real answers. Just a vague comment about trespassers or coyotes. We never went back. A few months later, my dad sold the property to a developer who planned to tear it down. Sometimes I still think about that place, about the figure in the field, about how it moved closer each night, how it never tried to speak, only to watch. I still see it sometimes in my dreams, standing just past the corn, head twisted too far, waiting for someone to look back.